I was on a work trip and video called my husband. When he moved, I saw my own sister's phone on my side of the bed. I didn't say a word. I flew home early the next day and brought both our parents to surprise them. When we opened the bedroom door, "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. So, if you have a moment, pour yourself a cup of coffee, or maybe something a little stronger. Settle in. Now, let me take you into this story. It all started on what should have been a perfectly normal, even triumphant, Tuesday. The hotel air conditioning in Denver hummed a low, lonely tune, a mechanical sigh that seemed to echo the emptiness of the room. It was a generic space, beige walls, uninspired corporate art, a window that overlooked a sea of glittering city lights that only made me feel smaller and farther from home. It was 11:30 at night, and I was bone-tired but also buzzing with a kind of electric energy. The kind that comes after 3 days of relentless work culminating in a massive professional victory. I'd been at a national sales conference, representing my firm. That very afternoon, after weeks of negotiations and a nail-biting final presentation, I had closed the Henderson account. This wasn't just another deal, this was the deal. The one that would secure our division's budget for the next 2 years, the one that came with a corner office and a vice president title attached. A promotion wasn't just likely, it was practically a certainty. My boss had shaken my hand so hard I thought he might break it, his face split in a grin. I felt a surge of pride, a deep satisfaction that came from knowing I had earned this, every bit of it. And all I wanted, with an ache that was sharp and sudden, was to share it with the one person whose validation truly mattered. My husband, Grant. Grant and I had been married for 10 years, a solid, comfortable decade. We'd been together for 12 years, since we were practically kids, fumbling our way through our early 20s. He was my rock, my best friend, my other half. He was the man who remembered I hated cilantro, the one who could always make me laugh with a stupid face when I was stressed, the one who'd held my hand through my father's health scare 2 years ago. We had built a life together, a beautiful, carefully constructed life in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Our home was our sanctuary, filled with the scent of his coffee in the morning and the sound of the classic rock station he always had playing. Our life was a rhythm, predictable and safe. Or so I had believed with every fiber of my being. My own birth family was a different story. It was more complicated, a web of unspoken resentments and carefully maintained facades. At the center of that web was my younger sister, Audrey. To say we were different would be an understatement. Growing up, Audrey was the sun, and I was the planet caught in her gravitational pull. She was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who could light up a room and have everyone eating out of the palm of her hand within minutes. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who got good grades and followed the rules. Our mother, Lorraine, was the architect of this dynamic. She never missed an opportunity to highlight our differences, always framing them in a way that left me feeling less than. "Oh, Meredith, you're so sensible," she'd say, patting my arm, and I knew it was her code for plain or unexciting. Then she'd turn to Audrey, her face softening, her voice turning to honey. "And you, my sweet girl, you have a light that just shines. Such an artistic soul." Just before I planned to call Grant, I'd made the obligatory call to my mother. It had gone exactly as I'd expected. I was bursting with my news, the words tumbling out of me. "Mom, you won't believe it, I landed the Henderson account. It's the biggest deal in the company's history." There was a pause. "Oh," she said, her voice distant, as if I'd just told her the weather. "That's nice, dear. Very practical. Did I tell you Audrey is thinking of taking up pottery? She saw a studio near her apartment. She has such wonderfully artistic hands. I just know she'll be a natural." A familiar, dull ache settled in my chest. It was a feeling I'd carried since childhood. "That's great, Mom," I said, my earlier excitement deflating like a balloon. "I'm sure she will be." I hung up the phone, shaking my head to clear the frustration. It didn't matter. What mattered was Grant. His pride in me was my shield against the world's little cuts. I clicked his name on my laptop, and the screen blinked to life with a familiar chime. His face appeared, and my heart lifted instantly. His dark hair was messy, like he'd been running his hands through it, and he was wearing my favorite gray sweater of his, the one that made his blue eyes look even brighter. "There's my superstar," he said, his voice a warm, rumbling sound that made me feel instantly closer to home. "Don't keep me in suspense. Tell me everything." I leaned back against the mountain of hotel pillows, cradling the laptop, and told him all of it. The tense final meeting, the moment the client said yes, the handshake, my boss's reaction. He listened intently, his eyes shining with pride. "That's my girl," he said when I finished, his smile so wide it made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I never doubted you for a second. We have to celebrate when you get back. A real celebration. This was us. This was our partnership." He was my biggest fan, my staunchest ally. The thought was as comforting as a warm blanket. He told me about his day, and then mentioned he'd just gotten back from dinner with his parents, Eleanor and Walter. They were the parents I had always wished for, kind, genuinely interested, and they treated me not as a daughter-in-law, but simply as their daughter. The love they showed me was a quiet, steady anchor in my often turbulent family waters. Everything in that moment felt perfect. Safe. It was the breathtaking, unknowing peace at the top of a roller coaster, just before the terrifying plunge. "So," I asked, settling deeper into the pillows, feeling the exhaustion of the last few days finally begin to recede, replaced by a warm, happy glow. "How was dinner with your parents? Did your mom make her famous lasagna? I've been craving it." "Even better," Grant said, and his smile seemed so genuine, so untroubled. "She tried that new chicken parmesan recipe you sent her. Said it was a huge hit. They both told me, explicitly, to tell you they miss you like crazy and can't wait for you to be home. My dad is already planning a celebratory barbecue for your promotion." A wave of affection washed over me. Eleanor and Walter. They were simply the best. Unlike my own mother, they saw my ambition not as some unfeminine trait, but as something to be admired and encouraged. We talked for another 10 minutes or so, the conversation meandering through the easy, comfortable topics of a long-married couple. We talked about a leaky faucet I needed to call a plumber for, a funny movie he'd seen, the neighbors' ridiculously oversized holiday decorations that were already going up even though it was only October. It was mundane. It was normal. It was us. Then, he glanced at something just out of the camera's view. "Hold on a sec, Mare," he said, his brow furrowing slightly. "I think I heard something downstairs. Probably just Mrs. Henderson's cat getting into the trash cans again." He started to stand up, and in that simple, fluid motion, everything fell apart. The laptop had been perched on his lap, and as he rose, it tilted precariously. The camera angle lurched downwards. For a split second, I saw the familiar popcorn texture of our bedroom ceiling. Then it dipped further, a dizzying sweep across the expanse of our king-sized bed. Our crisp, white duvet cover. My side of the bed. My pillows, plump just the way I liked them. And resting on my pillow, glowing under the warm light of my bedside lamp, was a phone. It wasn't a black phone, like Grant's. It wasn't my own silver phone, which was sitting on the nightstand beside me in Denver. This phone was encased in a very specific, very distinctive clear cover. A cover filled with delicate, pressed lavender and daisy flowers. It was a custom case. I knew every single tiny flower in that case, because I had spent 2 hours on Etsy designing it myself. I remembered agonizing over whether to include the baby's breath or not. I remembered the little thrill I felt when it arrived, knowing how much my sister would love it. It was the phone case I had given Audrey for her 27th birthday just last year. Time stopped. The air in my lungs turned to shards of glass. It was a physical sensation, a sudden, violent freezing from the inside out, so intense it made me gasp. My mind scrambled, a frantic, desperate search for a rational explanation. Maybe she left it here last week when she borrowed my baking dish. Maybe she came over to water the plants for me and forgot it. Maybe. But the excuses withered and died before they could even fully form. It was almost midnight. And the phone wasn't on the kitchen counter or the entryway table. It was on my pillow. In my bed. The camera shifted back up, and Grant's face filled the screen again. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I used to find so endearing. Now, it looked like the desperate act of a man trying to compose himself. "Everything okay down there?" I asked. I was a detached observer, listening to my own voice as if from a great distance. It was incredible how steady it sounded. Calm, even. Inside, a symphony of shattering glass was deafening me. "Yeah, all good," he said, his words coming out just a little too quickly. "Just that pesky cat. Always knocking over the recycling bin. You know how it is." A cold, clear thought cut through the chaos in my mind. We don't have a recycling bin outside our back door. We have a large communal dumpster down the alley behind the townhouse complex. The lie was so obvious, so insulting in its clumsiness. He wasn't even trying very hard. He thought I was that stupid. That trusting. And the most painful part was, until 30 seconds ago, he had been right. I just nodded slowly, my eyes locked on his face on the screen. I let the silence stretch, watching him. He fidgeted, his gaze darting away from the camera, unable to meet my eyes. I knew, in that moment, with a certainty that was absolute and soul-crushing, that confrontation would be a mistake. Not now. Not like this. 10 years of marriage had taught me that Grant hated being cornered. He would retreat, he would deny, he would deflect, he would gaslight me until I was the one apologizing. He would twist it all around until I was the crazy, jealous wife, and he was the innocent victim of my paranoia. No. If I was going to unearth the truth, I couldn't use a shovel. I needed a scalpel. I needed to be cold, and sharp, and precise. "So," he asked, and his voice now had a strange, brittle undertone I'd never heard before. It was a clumsy attempt at casualness that failed miserably. Was it eagerness for me to get off the phone? Anxiety that I had seen something? "When are you flying home again?" "Thursday afternoon, right? You said you had that final dinner." "That's right," I lied, and the word slid off my tongue with terrifying ease. My own return ticket was for Thursday morning, scheduled to land just before noon. But in that instant, I understood that the truth of my travel plans had just become my most valuable strategic advantage. The closing sessions run until 3, then there's a celebratory dinner with the clients. I'll probably just head to the airport after that. I'll be home very late. A flicker of relief. It was so small, so fast, that if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. But I saw it. The slight relaxing of his shoulders. The almost imperceptible release of tension in his jaw. It was all the confirmation I needed. It was a death sentence for our marriage, delivered in a single, unguarded micro-expression. "Great, great," he said, nodding a little too enthusiastically. "Well, I'll see you then. I'll come pick you up, no matter how late." "Actually," I said, my mind racing, constructing the lie as I spoke. "Don't worry about it. A few colleagues from the West Coast are on my flight, and we might grab a drink at the airport bar to celebrate. It'll be super late. Honestly, I'll just take a cab. You should get some sleep." "Oh. Okay, then," he said. "If you're sure." The relief was more obvious this time. The rest of the conversation was a blur of meaningless words. We said our goodnights. The phrase "I love you" felt like a foreign language in my mouth, the words heavy and wrong. The moment I clicked end call, the carefully constructed dam inside me broke. The screen went black, and my own reflection stared back at me. The composed, successful businesswoman from 20 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman with a face as pale and hard as marble, her eyes wide with a terrifying, cold clarity. The image of that lavender phone on my pillow was seared into the inside of my eyelids. My sister's phone. My husband. In my bed. The three phrases looped in my mind, a toxic, repetitive mantra of betrayal. The creature I had imagined earlier now had a name, and it was a hydra, with two faces I had loved and trusted more than anyone else in the world. And it was devouring my life from the inside out. For a moment, I thought I was going to be sick. A wave of nausea, hot and acrid, rose in my throat. I stood up and walked to the bathroom, gripping the cold marble of the vanity, and just breathed. In. Out. In. Out. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. Rage was a fire that would consume me before I could use it. What I needed now was ice. I needed to be a glacier, slow, cold, and unstoppable. My fingers, surprisingly steady, moved with a strange, detached purpose. I sat back down at the desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to the airline's website. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but my hands were precise. Find my reservation. Change flight. The screen showed a list of options. The earliest one available departed at 6:15 a.m. tomorrow morning. It landed at 10:27 a.m. I clicked it. Confirmed. The confirmation email appeared in my inbox a second later. I would be home before noon. Step 1 was complete. Now, for step 2. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my contact list. My first instinct was to call my best friend, Sarah. To pour out the whole sordid story, to cry and scream and let her tell me I wasn't crazy. But I couldn't. Not yet. This wasn't something I could talk about. This was something I had to do. I scrolled past Sarah's name. I scrolled past my mother's. My finger stopped on Eleanor. My mother-in-law. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was almost midnight back home, but I knew she and Walter were often up late, reading or watching old movies. I pressed the call button before I could second-guess myself. She answered on the second ring, her voice a welcome sound of warmth and genuine concern. Meredith, sweetheart. Is everything okay? It's so late. I took a deep breath and summoned a brightness into my voice that felt like a physical performance. It was the best acting of my life. Everything's wonderful, Eleanor. I have the most amazing news. I quickly explained that the conference had wrapped up a day early and that, by some miracle, I'd managed to get on a flight first thing in the morning. I want to surprise Grant, I said, and the word surprise tasted like acid. He thinks I'm not coming home until Thursday night. I was thinking I could land, get everything ready, and I was hoping maybe you and Walter would want to come over for a surprise lunch? Say, around 1 o'clock? There was a brief pause on the other end, and I could hear the muffled sound of her relaying the plan to Walter. Her voice came back on the line, absolutely bubbling with excitement. Oh, Meredith, that's a wonderful idea. He's been a bit down lately, you know. Said he's been missing you terribly. This will cheer him right up. We would absolutely love to come. Down lately. The words were like a physical blow. Of course he was. It must be so exhausting, living a double life. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles were white. Perfect, I said, my voice impressively steady. And Eleanor? Not a word to Grant. I really want this to be a surprise. My lips are sealed, dear, she promised, her voice full of conspiratorial glee. Oh, this will be such fun. We'll see you tomorrow, sweetheart. After I hung up, A cold, hard knot of determination settled in my stomach. Now for the most difficult part. I took another deep breath and dialed my mother, Lorraine. She answered with an audible sigh, as if my call was an imposition. Meredith? Do you know what time it is? Hi, Mom, I said, keeping my voice as light and cheerful as I could manage. Sorry to call so late, but I have a surprise. I'm coming home early tomorrow. My flight gets in the morning. Oh, she said. The lack of enthusiasm was a familiar sting, but tonight it barely registered. That's sudden. Yes, well, I wanted to do something special for the family. I'm having a little surprise welcome home lunch at the house, and I was hoping you and Dad could come. Around 1 o'clock. I'm inviting Eleanor and Walter, too. I held my breath, waiting for her response. Tomorrow at 1, she repeated, and I could hear the skepticism in her voice. I don't know, Meredith. I think Audrey might have needed my help with her resume tomorrow. She's thinking about a new career path. Let me check with her. The casual, automatic prioritization of her other daughter's vague, potential plans over my concrete invitation was the story of my life. But tonight, it served my purpose. Mom, I said, my voice hardening just enough to get her attention. It's important. I really want you and Dad to be there. She must have heard the uncharacteristic edge in my voice, because she relented. All right, all right. I suppose we can be there. It will be nice to see Grant. Is Audrey coming? I hope so, I said, the lie smooth as polished glass. I want to surprise both of them. That seemed to satisfy her. Okay, then. We'll see you tomorrow. We hung up. I stood up and began to pack my suitcase. My movements were precise, robotic. I folded my work blouses with sharp creases. I placed my shoes in their cloth bags. Each item I placed in the suitcase felt heavy, like a stone being dropped into a well. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. Then I lay down on top of the perfectly made hotel bed, staring at the blank ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of ugly, chaotic scenarios. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The time for that would come later. Right now, there was only the plan. The 4:30 a.m. alarm was a brutal, piercing sound in the silent hotel room. I swung my legs out of bed without hitting snooze. Sleep had been impossible anyway. I had spent the night in a strange, restless state, my mind refusing to shut down, instead choosing to torment me with a high-definition replay of every red flag I had blindly, stupidly ignored over the past year. The taxi ride to the Denver airport was a blur of dark, empty streets and the low murmur of a news radio station. The airport itself was an oasis of artificial light in the pre-dawn gloom, already humming with the quiet energy of early travelers. I moved through the check-in and security lines on autopilot, a ghost in the machine. I bought a large black coffee and a bottle of water at a kiosk near my gate and sat down, staring out the large window at the ground crew preparing the plane. My mind, unbidden, continued its merciless excavation of the past. There was that family barbecue at our house 2 months ago. A perfect summer day. I'd been inside, helping Eleanor carry out platters of food. When I came out onto the deck, I saw them. Grant and Audrey. They were sitting on the wide steps leading down to the lawn, their heads bent close together, sharing a pair of earbuds and laughing at something on his phone. His arm was draped casually along the back of the step behind her, his fingers just inches from the bare skin of her shoulder. I'd felt a tiny, fleeting prickle of something. Annoyance? It had seemed too intimate, somehow. But I'd dismissed it instantly. Don't be ridiculous, Meredith, I'd told myself. He's her brother-in-law. They're friends. You're just tired. Now, the memory was slick with a sinister, oily sheen. And then there was the business with the silk scarf. It was about 6 months ago. I'd been away for a weekend with my college girlfriends. When I got home Sunday night, I found a beautiful, expensive silk scarf, one I knew belonged to Audrey, draped over the back of our favorite armchair in the living room. "Oh," Grant had said when I held it up, his expression perfectly casual. "Audrey stopped by yesterday to drop off that book you wanted to borrow. She must have forgotten her scarf. She was only here for a minute." He'd seemed so plausible, so utterly normal. I hadn't thought twice about it. What reason did I have to? He was Grant. My Grant. He wouldn't lie to me. My God, how blind I had been. How willfully, desperately blind. And my mother, her role in this whole sickening play was becoming clearer and more monstrous with every memory I unearthed. Her constant refrain, "You should be nicer to Audrey, Meredith. Life is harder for beautiful girls, you know. She looks up to you so much." Her fawning over Grant. "Grant is so wonderful with your sister. He's like the big brother she never had. He really understands her artistic temperament." Was it possible she knew? Had she seen the signs too and chosen to ignore them? Or worse, had she known and, in some twisted way, encouraged it, happy that her precious, special daughter was the center of attention, even if it was my husband's? The thought was so ugly, so vile, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The boarding call for my flight crackled over the intercom, pulling me from my toxic reverie. I stood up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and joined the line of passengers. As I sat in my window seat, watching the ground fall away as the plane ascended into the dawn sky, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The woman I was yesterday, the happy, successful, trusting wife, was gone. She had died in a sterile Denver hotel room at 11:37 p.m. The woman taking her place was a stranger to me. She was cold, she was methodical, and she was flying home not to save her marriage, but to perform an autopsy on it. And she was going to make damn sure everyone involved was present to witness the cause of death. The plane landed a few minutes ahead of schedule, touching down on the familiar tarmac of my home airport. As I walked through the terminal, I moved with a new, unsettling sense of purpose. I was a soldier on a mission, and every step was deliberate. I went straight to the airport restroom, but not to freshen up. I needed to see my own face. I stood in front of the brightly lit mirror and took a long, hard look. The woman staring back at me was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and a grief so profound it felt ancient. But there was something else there, too. A hard, unyielding set to my jaw that I'd never seen before. This was not the face of a victim. This was the face of a reckoning. I hailed a taxi, and the driver's cheerful, "Where to, ma'am?" felt like it was from another universe. I didn't give him my address. "First stop," I said, my voice flat, "is an address in the suburbs." I gave him Eleanor and Walter's address. Their charming colonial home looked warm and welcoming in the late morning sun. The door swung open before I even had a chance to ring the bell, as if Eleanor had been waiting right behind it. "Meredith," she cried, her face breaking into a radiant smile. She pulled me into a tight, fierce hug that smelled of cinnamon and home and unconditional love. "Oh, it's so good to see you, sweetheart. But you look exhausted, you poor thing. Come in, come in. Walter is just getting the car ready." Walter appeared behind her, his kind eyes, the same shade of piercing blue as his son's, crinkling at the corners in a warm smile. "There's our girl," he said, enveloping me in a hug that felt like a protective shield. "Ready to go surprise that lazy son of mine? He's been moping around for days, says the house is too quiet without you." I sat in their sun-drenched kitchen for 15 minutes, sipping a cup of hot tea that Eleanor insisted I have. I felt a sharp, stabbing pang of guilt. These wonderful, loving people were bubbling with excitement for a happy surprise. They were about to have their hearts ripped out and stomped on, all because of the man they had raised and loved. And I was the one leading them to the slaughter. But there was no other way. They had to see it. They deserved to know the unvarnished, ugly truth. After leaving their house, I drove my rental car to my own parents' place. The feeling as I pulled into their driveway was completely different. There was no warmth here, only a sense of heavy obligation and the familiar, low-grade tension that always simmered just beneath the surface of our family life. My mother, Lorraine, opened the door, her expression impatient. "Meredith. You're here." It wasn't a warm greeting, but a flat statement of fact. "Franklin," she called over her shoulder without taking her eyes off me, "Meredith's here. We have to go now if we want to be on time." My dad, Franklin, appeared in the hallway. He was a quiet, gentle man who had long ago learned that it was easier to retreat into the background than to stand up to my mother's formidable personality. He gave me a hesitant, slightly awkward hug. "Good to have you home, kiddo," he mumbled into my hair. "So, what's all this about?" my mother demanded as we walked to my car, her purse clutched in her hand like a weapon. "A surprise lunch?" "It's all very dramatic of you, Meredith." "I just wanted to do something nice for everyone," I said, my voice tight. My hands clenched the steering wheel. "Well, is Audrey meeting us there?" she asked, her focus, as always, immediately shifting to her favorite child. I tried calling her cell phone again this morning, but it went straight to voicemail. "She's probably just sleeping in. You know how she needs her beauty rest." The casual mention of Audrey's phone sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. "I don't know, Mom," I said, pulling out of her driveway. The lie was getting easier to tell, which scared me a little. "I guess we'll all be surprised." The drive from their house to mine was one of the longest and most excruciating journeys of my life. Eleanor and Walter sat in the backseat with my dad, making pleasant, polite conversation about the weather and Eleanor's prize-winning roses. My mother sat in the passenger seat beside me, a silent, critical presence. I could feel her eyes on me, her brow furrowed in a little frown. It was as if she could sense the storm brewing just beneath my calm facade but couldn't comprehend its source. She had absolutely no idea that she was being chauffeured to the front row of the implosion of her own family. And as we made the final turn onto my street, a cold, dark, and vengeful part of me couldn't wait for her to see it. The 5-mile drive from my parents' house to mine felt like crossing a barren, hostile desert. The air inside the car was thick and suffocating, a strange cocktail of forced cheerfulness and simmering tension. From the backseat, Eleanor's light, happy chatter about her garden club was a surreal soundtrack to the storm raging inside me. Walter and my father murmured polite responses, but their contributions were sporadic. They were good men, caught in a social situation they didn't understand, just trying to be pleasant. The real weight in the car was in the passenger seat beside me. My mother, Lorraine. She had fallen completely silent. She wasn't looking at the scenery or checking her phone. She was just staring straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. I could feel her disapproval radiating off her in waves. Disapproval of what? My spontaneity? My dramatic plan? Or was it something deeper? Did she, on some subconscious level, sense that this was about Audrey? That her perfect, precious daughter was at the center of the storm I was driving us all into? I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles bone-white. My breathing was shallow. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn the car around. To abort the mission. To just go home, confront Grant alone, and deal with the fallout in private. But what would that achieve? It would be my word against his. And Audrey's. They would team up, they would lie, they would manipulate. And my mother would be their willing accomplice, painting me as the hysterical, jealous wife. I could see the whole narrative playing out in my head. Poor Audrey, she was just comforting Grant because he was so lonely. Meredith is always so busy with her career, you know. She misunderstood the situation. No. That was not going to happen. The truth, in all its ugly, naked glory, needed an audience. It needed witnesses who couldn't be gaslit or manipulated. The betrayal wasn't just a private matter between a husband and wife. They had made it a family affair the moment they brought my own sister into my bed. And so the family would witness the reckoning. I saw our house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The cheerful blue shutters my dad had helped us install. The magnificent oak tree in the front yard that Grant and I had planted together on our very first anniversary, a tiny sapling then, now a towering symbol of, what? 10 years of lies? The house looked like a picture from a home and garden magazine. A perfect little box, promising a perfect little life. My life. The life that was a lie. The life I was about to detonate from the inside out. I pulled into the driveway, parking right behind Grant's black sedan. His car was here. Of course it was. Where else would he be on a Wednesday morning? I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. "All right, everyone," I said, and my voice sounded strange and hollow in the confined space of the car. It was the voice of a tour guide leading a group into a haunted house. "Remember, we have to be absolutely quiet. I want to get his reaction on camera." I held up my phone, my thumb hovering over the video app icon. It was a lie, a necessary piece of stagecraft. It was the excuse I needed to have my phone out, ready. They all nodded, their faces a mixture of anticipation and confusion. I took one last, sweeping look at them. Eleanor and Walter, beaming with love for the son who was about to break their hearts. My father, looking vaguely uncomfortable but going along with it. My mother, her expression a mask of impatience, as if this whole thing was a frivolous waste of her time. None of them had a clue that they were seconds away from their world being turned completely upside down. I got out of the car. My legs felt strangely unsteady, like they didn't quite belong to me. I walked to the front door, the key feeling cold and heavy in my trembling hand. I slid it into the lock. It turned with a soft, familiar click. The sound of a key opening a tomb. I took one last, deep, shuddering breath, and I pushed the door open. The house was quiet. A deep, unnatural quiet that felt wrong for the middle of a weekday. The air was still and stuffy. The first thing I saw, the very first clue that confirmed my darkest fears, was a woman's coat. It was a stylish, camel-colored trench coat, the kind Audrey coveted. I'd never seen it before, but it screamed her style. It was flung carelessly over the back of the antique armchair in our entryway, the one my grandmother had left me in her will. A piece of my family history, now desecrated. "Oh," Eleanor said softly from behind me, her happy smile finally faltering as she took in the scene. "Is he having company over?" Before I could formulate a response, my mother's sharp eyes darted to the floor by the base of the stairs. "Well, look at that," she said, and there was a strange, unreadable note in her voice. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "Those are Audrey's shoes. I just bought them for her last month for her birthday." Lying on the polished hardwood floor, kicked off with the kind of haste that suggested urgency, was a pair of bright red, ridiculously high-heeled shoes. Audrey's signature. A wave of hot, acrid nausea washed over me. The coat. The shoes. The evidence was piling up, piece by damning piece, before we'd even taken 5 steps inside my home. My father and Walter exchanged a confused, deeply uneasy glance. The last vestiges of a festive mood had completely evaporated, replaced by a thick, anxious silence that was almost as loud as a scream. They were all looking at me now, their eyes wide with unspoken questions. I kept my face a blank mask. I offered no explanation, no reassurance. I just slowly raised a single finger to my lips, signaling for them to stay absolutely silent. Then, I pointed up the stairs. And at that exact moment, we heard it. It started as a low murmur of voices from the second floor, from the direction of the master bedroom. Then, the sound that would be burned into my memory for the rest of my life. A woman's light, carefree giggle. It was a sound I had known since she was a baby. My sister's giggle. And it was followed, a second later, by Grant's deeper, rumbling chuckle in response. The intimate, happy sound echoed in the silent, tense house. It was a sound of shared secrets, of private jokes, of lovers completely at ease in their sanctuary. My sanctuary. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening with a dawning, sickening horror. Walter's kind face hardened into a mask of stone. He looked from the red shoes on the floor to the staircase, and then his gaze locked with mine. The question in his eyes was a desperate, silent plea. Please, Meredith, tell me this isn't what I think it is. I met his gaze without flinching. I gave him a slow, deliberate, heartbreaking nod. It is exactly what you think it is. His face crumpled, and he pulled his crying wife into his arms. My mother, Lorraine, just stood there, frozen. Her face was a canvas of utter confusion, a bizarre refusal to connect the dots. She looked at the shoes, she listened to the laughter from upstairs, and then she looked at me, her expression still unnervingly, infuriatingly blank. There was no horror there. Not yet. Just a strange, unsettling denial. I turned away from them and started up the stairs. My feet felt like lead weights. I moved slowly, deliberately, my hand gliding along the cool wood of the banister. I could feel their presence behind me, a reluctant, horrified procession following me up to witness the execution of my marriage. Each step creaked softly under our combined weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. With every step, the sounds from the master bedroom became clearer. They weren't just talking. They were laughing, relaxed, happy. They were happy in my house. In my bedroom. In my bed. We reached the top of the stairs. The landing was dark. The only light came from the sliver of space under the master bedroom door at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. And from behind it, I could hear Audrey's voice, now clear as a bell. "Oh, stop it," she was saying, in a playful, flirty tone. "You're terrible." And Grant's voice, my husband's voice, replied, "You love it." We stood there for a long, agonizing moment in the dim upstairs hallway, a silent, horrified tableau vivant. The playful, intimate conversation from behind the bedroom door continued, each word a separate stab wound to my heart. They were completely oblivious, wrapped in their sordid little bubble of betrayal. Eleanor was crying silently now, her body shaking with suppressed sobs as she buried her face in Walter's shoulder. Walter held her tightly, his own face a mask of cold, unforgiving fury. My father looked pale and sick, his eyes fixed on that partially open door as if it were a portal to hell itself. And my mother, she just stared, her face still a bizarre, unreadable landscape of confusion and denial. It was as if her brain was simply refusing to process the evidence of her senses. I looked at each of them, my gaze lingering for a moment on my in-laws, then my father. I was giving them one last chance to turn back, to spare themselves the sight of what I knew, with sickening certainty, was behind that door. But they didn't move. Their loyalty, their love for me, held them there. They were in this with me now, until the bitter end. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway felt thin and sharp in my lungs. I walked the final few steps down the hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floor. I reached the door. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I raised my hand, placed it flat against the cool, smooth wood, and I shoved. Hard. The door swung inward with a solid thud, crashing against the interior wall. The sudden noise made them both jump. The scene it revealed will be forever seared into my memory, a horrifying, unforgettable snapshot of my life's greatest betrayal. The room was a mess. Clothes were strewn on the floor, Grant's button-down shirt, Audrey's flimsy sundress. 2 empty wine glasses sat on my nightstand, next to my wedding photo. The curtains were drawn, casting the room in a dim, sordid afternoon light. And there, in the middle of our bed, my bed, the bed where I slept and dreamed and loved, were my husband and my sister. They were tangled together under the sheets, propped up against the pillows, a laptop open in front of them. They were naked. Their bare shoulders touched. Audrey's long blonde hair was a messy halo around her head. For a single, stretched-out heartbeat, the world stopped moving. The only sound was the frantic, panicked pounding of blood in my ears. Then, Audrey looked up from the laptop screen. Her playful smile froze, then melted away. Her eyes widened in sheer, animal terror as she saw us standing in the doorway, me, his weeping mother, his thunderous father, my shell-shocked parents. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. She let out a small, strangled gasp and instinctively tried to pull the white duvet up to cover her bare chest. Grant turned, annoyed at the interruption, following her terrified gaze. When he saw the crowd assembled in his bedroom doorway, his jaw went slack. His face transformed from relaxed contentment to utter, slack-jawed panic. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. "Meredith," he breathed, his voice a hoarse, incredulous whisper. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Denver until Thursday." The sheer, unmitigated stupidity of his question, the absolute gall of him focusing on my travel plans in the face of this apocalypse, was what finally broke the horrified spell. A sound escaped my lips. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a sob. It was a dry, brittle, humorless laugh that sounded like tearing silk. "Clearly," I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice, "I came home early." The room, which had been frozen in a state of shock, erupted into a chaotic symphony of shame and fury. Eleanor let out a strangled sob that was half gasp, half wail, burying her face deeper into Walter's shoulder. My father, Franklin, physically stumbled back a step, one hand flying to his chest as if he'd been shot. Grant and Audrey scrambled in the bed, a pathetic, frantic tangle of limbs and white sheets, trying desperately to cover their nakedness. It was a clumsy, undignified dance of shame. "Mom! Dad!" Grant stammered, his eyes darting wildly between his parents, his face a grotesque mask of panic and disbelief. "This isn't. I swear, this isn't what it looks like. I can explain." "Explain?" Walter's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to shake the very floorboards. He took a menacing step into the room, his big frame filling the doorway. "Explain what, Grant? That you're sleeping with your wife's sister? In your wife's bed? There is no explanation for this. There is only filth." Audrey, ever the drama queen, started crying. But these weren't quiet, remorseful tears. They were the big, theatrical, gulping sobs she'd perfected since childhood, the kind designed to elicit sympathy and deflect blame. "Meredith, I'm so sorry," she wailed, clutching the sheet to her chest like a tragic heroine. "We didn't mean for this to happen. We fought it for so long. It just happened. It just happened?" I repeated, my voice dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "Really, Audrey? Did it just happen when you took off your dress? Did it just happen when you got into my bed? For how long has this been just happening behind my back?" She just cried harder, refusing to meet my eyes, hiding behind her curtain of blonde hair. But the real blow, the wound that would prove to be the deepest and most septic of all, didn't come from my cheating husband or my treacherous sister. It came from my own mother. Lorraine finally moved. She stepped past me, her movements stiff and jerky, and walked into the bedroom. But she didn't look at me. She didn't look at Grant. She walked to the side of the bed where her youngest daughter was weeping, and she looked down at her. And then she turned her head and pinned me with a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "Meredith," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Why would you do this? Why would you stage this horrible spectacle?" The words didn't compute. I stared at her, dumbfounded, my mind refusing to process what I had just heard. "What? Mom, did you hear what you just said? I staged this? Look at them. They did this. You could have handled this privately," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a strange, protective fire. "But it was a fire that burned for the wrong daughter. You could have been an adult about it. But no. You had to drag all of us here. You knew how sensitive your sister is. Did you have to humiliate her like this? In front of everyone? This is just cruel, Meredith. Absolutely cruel. The world tilted on its axis and spun into blackness. My husband had betrayed me. My sister had betrayed me. And now, in the single most painful, devastating moment of my life, my own mother was standing in the wreckage, pointing a finger not at the perpetrators, but at me. I was being blamed. For discovering the truth. For exposing their disgusting, unforgivable secret. It was in that moment that something inside me, a fragile, hopeful thing that had survived 32 years of neglect and criticism, finally shattered for good. The part of me that had spent a lifetime desperately seeking her approval, that had yearned for a single crumb of her unconditional love, it just died. It withered up and turned to dust. Eleanor, God bless her soul, lifted her tear-streaked face from her husband's shoulder. "Are you insane, Lorraine?" she sobbed, her voice thick with disbelief and disgust. "Have you lost your mind? Your daughter just found her husband in bed with your other daughter, and you're worried about humiliation? Meredith is the victim here. Your son," she spat the word at Grant, her voice filled with venom, "and your daughter are despicable, morally bankrupt people." Walter pointed a trembling, authoritative finger at Grant. "Get dressed. Both of you. And then, Grant, you get the hell out of this house. Don't speak to me. Don't look at me. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a son." My mother's words echoed in the suffocating silence of the room, ricocheting off the walls and lodging like shrapnel in my heart. "You knew how sensitive your sister is." Sensitive. That one word was the spark. It was the lit match dropped into the puddle of gasoline that had been pooling inside me for my entire life. All the years of being pushed aside, of being the reliable, sensible one while Audrey was the special, artistic one. All the casual dismissals of my achievements, the fawning praise for her every whim. All the holidays, the birthdays, the family dinners where I felt like a ghost at my own table. It all came rushing back, a tidal wave of resentment and pain so immense it finally broke the surface. I turned to my mother, and the voice that came out of me was a raw, guttural sound that I didn't recognize as my own. It was the sound of a wounded animal. "Sensitive?" I screamed, the word ripping from my throat, raw and ragged. "You want to talk about sensitive? For 32 years, I have listened to you praise her for breathing while you criticized me for achieving. I put myself through college and paid off my own student loans while you and Dad drained your savings to fund her artistic journey to nowhere. I bit my tongue every single time you compared my steady job to her free spirit. Every single time you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was a disappointment because I wasn't her." My whole body was shaking with a rage so pure and white-hot it was cleansing. I was pointing a trembling finger at Audrey, who was now cowering behind Grant, the picture of pathetic victimhood. "And this is what she does? This is your precious, sensitive, special little girl? She sneaks into my house, she sleeps in my bed, with my husband, the man I have built a life with, and you have the absolute audacity to stand there and defend her? To blame me?" I took a step toward my mother, who actually flinched and took a step back. "Have you ever seen me, Mom?" I sobbed, the words tearing out of me now. "Have you ever, for one single second, looked at me and been proud of me? Or am I just the background character in the Audrey show? Even now. Even in this unbelievable, soul-destroying moment, I'm the villain of your story because I dared to pull back the curtain on her disgusting behavior." Hot, furious tears were streaming down my face, but I didn't care. "I am done," I choked out, the words tasting like freedom and ash. "I am so done." My gaze swept the room, landing on Grant, then Audrey, then my own parents. My voice dropped to a low, shaking, and utterly final command. "Get out." They just stared at me, frozen. I repeated, my voice rising to a full-throated roar that came from the depths of my soul, "Get out of my house." "Grant, Audrey, and you too," I looked directly at my stunned parents, "get out. Now." Franklin, my dad, looked utterly broken. He was a casualty in a war he never understood. He just turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked out of the room without a single word. Grant and Audrey finally scrambled into action, grabbing their clothes from the floor, their movements clumsy with panic and shame. My mother stood her ground for a second, her mouth opening as if to argue, to get in one last-ditch defense of her favored child. "Don't," I warned, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet that was more threatening than any scream. "Don't you say another word to me." Her mouth snapped shut. She stared at me, her face a bizarre mixture of anger and shock, and then she turned on her heel and followed my father out of the room. Grant, now hastily dressed, wouldn't look at me. He grabbed his keys and wallet from the dresser and practically ran out of the room. Audrey, clutching her dress to her chest, scurried out behind him like a frightened rat. I followed them down the stairs. I stood at the front door and watched them pile into my parents' car. I watched until the car backed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. The front door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the suddenly empty house like a gunshot, the final, definitive end to the life I once knew. And then, silence. The only people left in the house were me, Eleanor, and Walter, standing together amidst the emotional wreckage. The air was thick with pain, betrayal, and an unspoken, profound grief. I just stood there, my body trembling, the adrenaline that had fueled my rage slowly draining away, leaving behind a vast, empty, desolate wasteland where my heart used to be. CTA. If you are still listening, if you've followed me to this dark, quiet, broken place, please do me a favor. Like this video and comment with the number 1 below. It lets me know that you're out there, that you're a wonderful person who is walking this journey with me. Your support is a small light in a very dark room, and it means more to me than you'll ever know. Please, just comment with the number 1 so I know you're here. And now, let me tell you what happened next. The silence that followed the slam of the door was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was a presence. A heavy, ringing void filled with everything that had just been said, everything that had just been destroyed. I felt hollowed out. Like someone had reached inside me and scooped out all my vital organs, leaving an empty, aching shell. I stumbled over to the armchair in the living room, not the one in the entryway that had been desecrated by Audrey's coat, and sank into it. I wrapped my arms around myself and just stared at the opposite wall, at a framed photo of Grant and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so happy, so utterly clueless. I couldn't cry. I think I was beyond tears, in a place of pure, frozen shock. Eleanor was the first to move. She seemed to float across the room, her own face streaked with tears, her expression one of profound grief. She knelt on the floor in front of my chair. She didn't say anything. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. She just took both of my cold, trembling hands in hers. Her hands were warm and steady, a small point of human contact in a world that had just gone completely cold. She held them, rubbing small circles on my knuckles with her thumbs, until the violent, uncontrollable shaking in my body began to subside into a low, steady tremor. Walter, a man I had only ever seen as a gentle giant with a ready laugh, was radiating a quiet, terrifying fury. He stood in the middle of the living room, his big hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked up the stairs toward the bedroom, and his jaw was tight with a rage that was all the more frightening for its silence. Then he turned, his movements stiff and purposeful. "Right," he said, his voice rough and gravelly. "First things first." He walked back upstairs. I heard him moving around in the bedroom. A few minutes later, he came back down, his arms laden with a massive, messy ball of fabric. It was everything from my bed. The sheets, the duvet, the pillows, everything Grant and Audrey had touched. He carried it with an expression of utter disgust, holding it away from his body as if it were radioactive waste. "We're burning this," he said, his voice flat and final. "We're getting all of this filth out of your house right now." And that's what we did. In a strange, surreal, and deeply cathartic hour, the three of us worked in near silence. Walter carried the bundle of desecrated bedding out to the metal fire pit in the backyard that we normally used for summer bonfires. He doused it with lighter fluid and, without ceremony, dropped a match onto it. The flames whooshed to life, consuming the symbols of my betrayal in a plume of greasy, black smoke. While the fire raged outside, Eleanor went into the linen closet and came back with a fresh set of crisp, clean sheets, the lavender-scented ones I reserved for the guest room. She stripped the mattress bare. Then, together, the two of us remade my bed. The simple, domestic act was both agonizing and profoundly healing. We smoothed the sheets, tucked the corners, and fluffed the new pillows. We were erasing them. We were reclaiming my space, one small, deliberate action at a time. While I went through the house, collecting the few things Audrey had left behind, her red shoes, her coat, a tube of expensive lipstick from the bathroom vanity, Eleanor went downstairs and started making a fresh pot of coffee. The rich, familiar, comforting smell began to fill the house, a small act of normalcy that pushed back against the sordid, ugly atmosphere they had left behind. We sat at my kitchen table, the three of us, sipping hot, black coffee from mugs that felt too heavy in our hands. The silence was no longer ringing, it was softer now, a shared space of grief. "Meredith," Walter finally said, his deep voice thick with an emotion he was struggling to control. "I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. I look at what he did, and he is not the man we raised. I don't know who that person is." "It's not your fault," I whispered, the words scratching my raw throat. "None of this is your fault. You and Eleanor, you have been more of a real family to me than my own ever was." Eleanor reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her touch was firm, grounding. "We're your family, Meredith," she said fiercely, her eyes locking with mine, demanding that I believe her. "That does not change. Do you hear me? Nothing that happened today changes that. If anything, it makes it stronger." In the hours that followed, they became my shield, my advocates, my family. They didn't leave my side. They helped me call a 24-hour locksmith to have all the locks on the house changed immediately. They sat with me, a silent, supportive presence, as I made the most difficult phone call of my life, to a highly recommended divorce lawyer whose number Walter had found online. They ordered pizza when Eleanor realized, around 7 p.m., that none of us had eaten all day. When they finally prepared to leave late that evening, long after darkness had fallen, Eleanor hugged me tightly at the door. "Call us for anything," she commanded gently. "I mean it. If you wake up at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. and you can't stand to be alone, you call us. We will be here in 20 minutes. You are not alone in this." That night, I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own bed, even with the clean, lavender-scented linens. I lay awake for hours, staring into the darkness, the horrific events of the day playing on a relentless, high-definition loop in my mind. The betrayal was a physical pain, a deep, persistent ache that started in my chest and radiated out through my entire body. But underneath the crushing weight of the pain, something else was beginning to grow. A tiny, cold, hard seed of resolve. They had tried to destroy me. They had tried to break me. I would not let them. The days that followed were a surreal, exhausting blur of administrative tasks and profound emotional exhaustion. The world outside my newly secured front door kept moving, but my own life had ground to a screeching halt. I took an emergency leave of absence from work, unable to even contemplate facing my colleagues or pretending that my life hadn't just imploded. My first meeting with my divorce lawyer, a sharp, impeccably dressed, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis, was both a relief and a harsh dose of reality. I sat in her sterile, modern office and told her the whole story, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I was just reciting facts. She listened intently, her expression unreadable, occasionally jotting down notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she put down her pen and looked at me, her eyes softening for the first time. "Meredith," she said, her voice firm but kind. "First, I am so deeply sorry you are going through this. What you have described is a profound, dual betrayal. Second, you did absolutely the right thing by securing witnesses. It makes the at-fault aspect of this much clearer." She explained that the prenuptial agreement Grant and I had signed years ago was solid, but his flagrant infidelity, especially with a family member, gave us significant leverage. She assured me the process should be relatively straightforward. It was anything but. 2 days after I filed, the counterattack began. Grant, apparently having been coached by my mother and sister, hired a notoriously aggressive lawyer known for his scorched earth tactics. The first letter arrived via courier. It was a masterpiece of legal gaslighting. It claimed Grant was entitled to half of everything, including the house. It argued that the down payment, which had come from a substantial inheritance I received from my beloved grandmother, should be considered a marital gift and thus subject to division. The letter went on to claim my erratic and hysterical behavior in staging a public confrontation was proof of my emotional instability and that Grant had been suffering in a lonely marriage for years. They were trying to paint me as the villain, the crazy wife who drove her poor, neglected husband into the arms of another woman. The deepest, most painful cuts, however, came not from the lawyers, but from my own family. My mother, having been blocked, started emailing me. Long, rambling diatribes that swung wildly between pleading and outright emotional blackmail. "You are tearing this family apart, Meredith. Audrey is a complete wreck. She can't eat, she can't sleep. She could lose her job over the stress. You have to find it in your heart to forgive them. It was a mistake. People make mistakes." A mistake? I asked her during one particularly awful phone call, after she'd managed to get through using my father's phone. My voice was dangerously calm. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk from the store. A mistake is taking a wrong turn on the highway. Systematically lying and sleeping with your sister's husband for God knows how long isn't a mistake, Mom. It's a series of deliberate, selfish choices. "You're being so cold, so unforgiving," she sobbed into the phone. "What happened to the sweet, kind-hearted girl I raised?" "She died," I said, my voice flat. "She died last Wednesday in her bedroom. You were there." And I hung up the phone. I blocked my father's number too, a move that pained me, but was necessary for my survival. Then the texts started, a barrage from Audrey. They were long, rambling paragraphs filled with self-pity and manipulative nonsense. "You don't know what it's like to always be in your shadow, Mare. You were always the smart one, the successful one. Grant was the only one who ever really saw me, the real me. I never meant to hurt you. I love you." It was a masterclass in narcissistic deflection. In her story, she was the real victim, and I was the cruel, withholding older sister who had everything and deserved to have it taken away. Through all of this toxicity, Eleanor and Walter were my unwavering support system. They were my generals in a war I never wanted to fight. They helped me sort through years of financial paperwork, searching for the documents proving the source of the inheritance for the down payment. Walter, who had a background in finance, sat with me at my kitchen table for hours on end, his reading glasses perched on his nose, going through bank statements and investment accounts, ensuring every single one of my premarital assets was protected and accounted for. When Grant's lawyer tried to claim a stake in my future earnings from my anticipated promotion, Walter provided my lawyer with years of my performance reviews and salary statements, methodically proving that my career success was the result of my own hard work and had nothing to do with any emotional support from Grant. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of legal threats and hateful emails, Walter sat at my kitchen table and looked at me, his kind eyes full of a deep, sorrowful resolve. "Meredith," he said, his voice heavy. "I want you to know this. If it comes to it, if they try to drag this into a courtroom, both Eleanor and I will take the stand. We will put our hands on a Bible and we will testify against our own son. We will tell the judge exactly what we saw, and exactly what your mother said. He is our son, and we love him, but what he did was wrong. Unforgivable. And in this, we stand with you. 100%. The thought of these two wonderful, honorable people having to publicly testify against their own child was heartbreaking, but their unwavering loyalty was a balm to my shattered, bleeding soul. They were showing me what family truly meant. After 6 long, brutal, and soul-crushingly expensive months, the divorce was finalized. Faced with the undeniable testimony of his own parents and the ironclad documentation of my inheritance, Grant and his shark of a lawyer finally backed down. The judge awarded me the house outright and protected all of my premarital assets and future earnings. Grant walked away with only his personal belongings, his car, and his half of our modest joint savings account. I never wanted to see him or my sister again as long as I lived. The legal battle was over, but I knew the emotional one was just beginning. The house, my beautiful house that I had fought so hard to keep, now felt like a mausoleum. It was no longer a home, it was a monument to a dead marriage. Every room, every piece of furniture, held a memory that was now tainted, poisoned. The armchair where Grant used to read the paper. The spot in the kitchen where Audrey and I once stood, laughing while baking Christmas cookies years ago. The ghosts were everywhere. I couldn't heal there. So, I made a radical decision. I called a realtor, a woman recommended by Ms. Davis, and I put the house on the market. In the booming real estate market, it sold in less than a week for well over the asking price. Standing in the empty, echoing house on closing day, I felt a profound sense of release. I was closing the door on that chapter of my life, literally and figuratively. With the proceeds from the sale and the security of my own finances, I did something I had never, ever imagined I would do. I went online and booked a one-way ticket to Italy. I packed 2 large suitcases with clothes and books, put the rest of my life into a climate-controlled storage unit, and I left. I didn't tell anyone except Eleanor and Walter. For 3 glorious, healing months, I wandered through Italy. I was completely anonymous, just another American tourist. And it was exactly what I needed. I started in Rome, where I spent my days getting lost in the ancient streets, sitting in sun-drenched piazzas, sketching the magnificent fountains in a journal. I ate gelato for lunch and drank red wine with dinner, feeling the tightly coiled anxiety in my chest begin to unwind, not by painful knot. From Rome, I took a train to the coast and hiked the breathtaking trails of Cinque Terre. I walked for miles each day, the salty sea air feeling like it was cleansing my lungs of all the toxicity I had been breathing for months. I would sit on a cliffside, watching the turquoise waves crash against the rocks below, and I would just breathe. Finally, I ended up in a tiny, quiet village in Tuscany. I rented a small room in an old stone farmhouse and enrolled in a week-long cooking class. It was run by a cheerful, round grandmother named Nana Sofia, who didn't speak a word of English. We communicated through gestures, laughter, and the universal language of food. She taught me to make pasta from scratch, to knead the dough with the heels of my hands, to feel when it was just right. In the warmth of her kitchen, covered in flour, I felt a flicker of joy for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Slowly, painfully, I started to feel like myself again. Or rather, I started to discover who I was without the defining titles of wife or sister or daughter. I was just Meredith. A woman who loved art and the sea and the taste of fresh basil. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like it was enough. One afternoon, sitting at an outdoor cafe in Florence, enjoying an espresso, I checked my email for the first time in weeks. Tucked among the junk mail was a message from my father. It was the first direct communication I'd had with him since that horrible day. The subject line was simply, "I'm sorry." My hand trembled as I opened it. The email was short, only a few sentences. He didn't make excuses for my mother or for Audrey. He didn't ask for my forgiveness. He simply said that he was sorry for his silence, for his weakness, for not standing up for me when I needed him most. He said he had failed as a father, and that he would live with that regret for the rest of his life. He said he hoped that one day, I would find happiness again. I sat there, staring at my phone, as tears streamed down my face. But they weren't tears of anger or sadness. They were tears of a quiet, bittersweet release. It was a tiny crack of light in a door I thought had been sealed shut and bolted forever. I didn't reply, I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't delete the email either. When I finally returned to the States, I didn't go back to my old town. The ghosts there were too numerous. I moved to a small, charming city a few hours away, a place known for its vibrant art scene and beautiful parks. It was a place where no one knew my story. I found a lovely little townhouse on a tree-lined street, one with a small, neglected garden in the back that I could make my own. And I started over. My new life was quiet, and I cherished the peace. I transferred to a regional office of my company, taking the promotion I had earned. My new colleagues were welcoming, and I slowly began to build a small circle of friends. But my true family, my anchor, remained Eleanor and Walter. They would drive down to visit me at least once a month, their car always loaded with homemade food and things for my new house. They helped me pick out furniture, they advised me on which flowers to plant in my garden, they sat with me on my new patio, just talking for hours. They were my constant, my proof that love didn't require a shared bloodline. But even with my new life, there was still a small, quiet ache in my heart, a piece of me that felt unfinished. Even when I was married to Grant, I had always known, deep in my bones, that I wanted to be a mother. It was a dream we had talked about for years, but one that Grant had always pushed off, citing financial concerns or career timing. Just one more year, Mare, he'd always say. Let's just wait until my next bonus. Now, living my life on my own terms, I realized something profound. I didn't need a husband to have a family. I could build one myself. I began the long, arduous, and emotionally draining process of adoption. The paperwork was a mountain, the home studies were invasive, the interviews were probing. It was a process designed to test the limits of one's patience and resolve. There were days I felt overwhelmed, days I doubted if I had what it took. But Eleanor and Walter were my biggest cheerleaders. They wrote glowing, heartfelt character references for me. They drove down to help me deep clean and baby-proof my house for the home visits. They celebrated every small milestone, every checked box, as if it were their own victory. You are going to be the most wonderful mother, Meredith, Eleanor told me, her eyes shining with absolute certainty. That is a fact. A full year after I submitted my initial application, I got the call that changed my life forever. A 5-year-old girl named Thea needed a permanent, loving home. The social worker told me she was quiet, shy, and had been bounced between foster homes for most of her young life. My heart ached for her. The first time I met her, in a sterile, brightly colored playroom at the social services agency, she hid behind the social worker's legs, her big brown eyes peeking out at me with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I didn't rush her. I just sat down on the floor a few feet away, and I started talking to her, not about anything important, just about the sparkly red shoes she was wearing and the friendly-looking dinosaur on her t-shirt. I asked her if her dinosaur had a name. She shook her head shyly. I told her I thought he looked like a Ferdinand. A tiny smile touched her lips. After about 20 minutes, she took a hesitant step toward me. I knew in my heart, in that very moment, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that she was my daughter. 3 months later, after a whirlwind of final legal proceedings and transition visits, the adoption was finalized. Thea came home. The day I brought her to her new home for good, Eleanor and Walter were there, waiting on the front porch. Thea was nervous, her little hand clinging tightly to mine. I saw the anxiety on their faces too, they wanted so desperately for this to go well. Walter was holding a giant, fluffy teddy bear, almost as big as Thea was. Eleanor was holding a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies, still warm from the oven. They didn't crowd her or overwhelm her with questions. They just knelt down to her level. "Hello, Thea," Walter said, his deep voice gentle. "It's very nice to meet you. This fellow here told me he was looking for a new home, and I thought he might like your room. And I heard," Eleanor added with a warm smile, "that you might like cookies." They let her lead. And within an hour, Thea was giving Walter a solemn tour of her new pink and purple bedroom, and sitting on Eleanor's lap in the big comfy armchair, listening to a story about a brave little mouse. My heart, which I thought had been permanently scarred and broken, felt like it was stitching itself back together, stronger than before. This was my family. A family built not on blood or biology or obligation, but on pure, unconditional love and choice. It was the most beautiful, powerful, and real thing I had ever known. The years that followed were the happiest, most fulfilling of my life. The quiet townhouse was no longer quiet, it was filled with the sounds of a child's laughter, with princess songs sung off-key, with the nightly ritual of bedtime stories. Watching Thea grow and blossom was a gift I thanked the universe for every single day. The shy, withdrawn little girl I had met in that playroom disappeared, replaced by a funny, bright, and incredibly kind child who loved to dance, paint, and ask a million questions a minute. We celebrated her 8th birthday with a big, chaotic party in our backyard. The little garden I had painstakingly cultivated over the years was in full bloom, a riot of color. Thea's friends from school were running through the sprinkler, their shrieks of delight filling the warm summer air. Eleanor and Walter, whom Thea had instantly and lovingly christened Nana and Papa, were manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs. My father, Franklin, was there too. Our relationship was a quiet work in progress. After I'd returned from Italy, he had reached out again. We met for coffee. It was awkward and painful, but it was a start. He never made excuses for my mother, but he expressed his own profound regret. He started visiting, at first just for an hour or two, then for whole afternoons. He was a doting, gentle grandfather to Thea, patiently teaching her how to play chess and build elaborate Lego castles. Our relationship wasn't what it once was, but it was something new, something honest, and for now, that was enough. My mother and Audrey were a distant, painful memory from another lifetime. I heard through my father, in a brief, clipped conversation, that they had moved to a different state a few years back. Apparently, Grant had followed Audrey there, but their relationship had been tumultuous and had eventually imploded in a dramatic fashion. He didn't offer details, and I didn't ask for them. Their life was their own story, and it no longer had any bearing on mine. I felt nothing for them anymore, not anger, not sadness, just a vast, quiet indifference. They were strangers who shared some of my DNA. That afternoon, as I was lighting the candles on Thea's giant unicorn cake, I caught Walter's eye across the yard. He was watching Thea as she tried to teach my dad a silly dance she'd learned at school. He looked over at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and he gave me a smile of such pure, unadulterated joy and contentment that it took my breath away. In that single, perfect moment, I was overcome with a profound sense of peace. The brutal, devastating betrayal that had shattered my world hadn't been the end of my story. It had been a violent, painful, but necessary beginning. It had been a forest fire that had burned away a life that was built on a rotten foundation of lies and obligation. And from the ashes, something new and beautiful and strong had grown. It had led me to Thea. It had solidified my bond with two of the most wonderful people I have ever known, my true parents. It had even, in a strange way, given me a new, more honest relationship with my father. It had taught me that I was stronger, more resilient, and more capable of love than I ever thought possible. That night, after Thea was tucked into bed, her room filled with new toys, her face still sticky with birthday cake, I sat out on my little patio, a glass of wine in my hand. The air was fragrant with the jasmine I had planted. I looked up at the vast, star-dusted sky and thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who thought her happiness was dependent on her husband's love and her mother's approval. I barely recognized her anymore. The woman I was now was a mother. A cherished daughter to the parents who chose her. She was the sole architect of her own joy, the master of her own small, happy universe. The lavender phone, the slammed door, the bitter, angry tears, they were all just steps on a painful, necessary, and ultimately beautiful path. The path that had led me right here. Home. Truly, finally home. Thank you. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through the dark parts. If you've been through something similar, if any part of this resonated with that hidden place in your own heart, please know that you are not alone. Sometimes, the deepest wounds, the most unthinkable betrayals, are the very things that lead us to our greatest strengths and our most authentic lives. Please, if you feel comfortable, share your thoughts or a piece of your own story in the comments below. Your stories matter. This is a community, and we are stronger together. Take care of yourselves, and please, take care of each other.